Hi, welcome back to the ANS Way. In this video, we are going to continue our How to Move to the USA series with a Q&A with one question and one very long answer. So in one of our last videos, somebody called Rachel asked us a question, and we thought it would be a lot easier to explain via a video. And also we thought it would be useful for other people that are in a similar position to this question. The question is, hey, living in the UK, wanting to move to the USA. Partner is a fireman and I work in maternity as a healthcare assistant. We have young children, struggling to find the first steps. Do our jobs mean anything in the USA, or won't these particular fields help us with this? Your videos are fast. So we'll put the question up as well. Where to start?
We don't usually discuss much off camera before doing this, but we had a very lengthy discussion, and it's quite a difficult one to answer because people are attached to their jobs and emotions usually come before everything. Most people are not that objective. So we wanted to answer it by saying, of course your jobs mean something in the US and the UK.
Yeah.
So firefighters and medical assistants and medical professionals are needed everywhere in the world, and they are valued everywhere in the world. However, that doesn't necessarily mean, which is what we're going to answer, that they have any value when it comes to transitioning from one country to another, particularly from the UK to the USA. So what we're going to do is explain some of the reasons why, although jobs may have high value, they don't necessarily help you when trying to emigrate or immigrate. I never know which way round that is.
Depends which way around.
Yeah, you're doing it. Emigrating from the UK to the USA. And Selena's going to explain.
The first thing to remember here is, we've explained this in lots of videos, but it's always good to remind everyone. If you are looking at an employment-based visa, an employer has to sponsor your move. That means if I'm here in the USA and I'm hiring for a job and I'm looking for somebody to fulfill that job, when I'm looking outside of the USA, I'm going to have to sponsor it and cover the costs. And that is something that is really important to have an appreciation for because at the very minimum, just the attorney fees with the visa, it's probably going to cost a company a minimum of $10,000.
If you're really
Absolute
cheap.
minimum. And that's not offering any relocation package. So that's not covering the cost to move your family across, the other services. Typically a relocation package for a company costs in the region of $60,000. So that's the first important thing to kind of just bear in mind when you're thinking about, why aren't I finding a job, or why isn't somebody willing to sponsor me from the UK?
There's also the part where the US needs to employ its own people.
Yes.
So it's always looking at, why would we need somebody external to come in? So think about, that has to be because there's a shortage which they cannot fill in a short frame of time. So if there's jobs that you can upskill people in a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, even 6 months, even a year probably, they're more likely to spend that money because the return is going to be really quick and you can upskill a lot of people. As Selena said, if you think about $60,000 per person, let's say you needed 15 people. Have you really got nearly $1 million to pay for all of those people just to get them here without knowing there's going to be a value add on that, which is why it's usually quite individual when they decide whether they want to bring people over. It's not an en masse thing.
Another thing that a company has to do, so if they are looking to hire from another country, as part of that petition when they are applying for your visa, we're not immigration attorneys, so we do not get the language correct here, but it's something around a labor certification law that they have to abide to. And it's essentially protects the USA from people just hiring willy-nilly when they could look locally to hire. So the idea is to protect the locals, American citizens, first and foremost, in order to get those jobs over just hiring externally.
Which also protects the job market in terms of the financial, because if you ended up just bringing in people that were happy to do jobs for $10 a year and you brought in 100,000, the whole market would collapse. So there's lots and lots of different reasons why countries have to protect the way they bring people into them. Maybe not England, but that's a different story.
Going back to the question, partner's a fireman and you're a healthcare assistant, do they have value in the USA? Now, thinking about what we just said, if an employer is to sponsor your visa, number one, there's the time it takes you to get there rather than hiring locally, where typically here, if they're looking, they can hire someone as quickly and get them into the job as quickly as 1 week. So there has to be a reason why they really want to wait relocate that amount of time. In addition to that, cover the costs. So what we thought we would explain a little bit here is the value of your role and give some perspective there. And I think we can take the example of, say, of somebody who's a manager.
So if you're a manager, what does that actually mean? You can have a manager of a local sportswear shop or shoe shop, and you could have a manager that manages an entire business for a country or multiple regions. Now, if you're the manager of a shoe shop or a sportswear shop, of course that has a ton of value. It has a ton of value to that local economy, it has a ton of value to you and your family. But actually for the US, what does that mean? What are you bringing over? They can upskill a sportswear manager relatively quickly. That's assuming they don't already have people on that track already, which they definitely do. However, a manager of a particular business, pick a medical business, somebody that manages a particular product or a service that this has, there's inherent value in that role. It's not just their education, which is worth something. It's the fact that they have contacts, they know how to run that business, they know what those products are, they know the legals, they know the HR stuff.
Have a global perspective on things.
Exactly. And it's those little things that if you haven't worked in organizations like that, that you don't necessarily see that there are these intangibles that don't have a direct value, but they have masses of value. Even think about somebody's notebook or pocketbook in terms of the contacts that they have in industry. That's one of the most valuable things. The most valuable thing at the moment is people's data. It's that has the value. So when you have a highly skilled global manager in a big company, there's huge amounts of value built into that. Whereas somebody that's a manager of a sportswear store doesn't necessarily have that available, or isn't able to prove that at least.
And it's actually a question we get a lot, phrased in different ways. Obviously, your question was very dedicated to your situation and your family, but we have had people that say, oh, I work as a manager in this retail store.
Yeah, we did have that.
And people will think, oh, I can just contact the employer of that shop in the USA and apply for those jobs, but not realizing that they have to cover the costs, and there has to be a reason why you as an individual are valuable enough that they would bring you across. The other thing I wanted to add to what Ant was saying is, even if I think about the company I work in, we have shifted our way of working a lot to remote working. So most people aren't actually required to be in an office, and that's actually made things a lot harder. We got lucky.
Really lucky, because it was just before they needed you to be in the California office.
Yeah, they did. The way of working has completely changed for companies now. So where companies before would have said, oh, we absolutely want you working in the USA, they're actually happy to have you working in the UK, in Germany, and France now, because everyone's remotely working, and as long as you're flexible with your hours, it's not an issue. Now, what might change for a company, and this is where the cost-benefit analysis comes in. We recently had somebody who's head of finance. They were based in Germany, and they made the decision that they wanted him to move over to California and actually work from the California office. That is because, on balance, when they think about his hours of work, when he's available, the amount of times they want him to go in person to a meeting, it was more cost effective for them to pay for that relocation package to get him across than to have him serve the business from Germany, because overall they can get more out of him from being in the California office. So these are the things of when you're paying someone's salary, ultimately a company is thinking about what's their return on that individual. And often it's, especially for large corporations, it's in the millions.
I know we haven't directly answered the question. It's more to get you in the mindset of how to think about the structure of these things, or why certain countries or companies would want to employ people into their country. It's a mindset. If you think about the medical assistant, now I don't know how long it took you to train to do your job, but we had a brief look at it, and in the NHS, when you go on the careers website, it doesn't have any prerequisites. So you can walk into that job and you can train on the job, or they need 2 GCSEs, A to C.
Yeah, for a healthcare assistant. And I think what I checked is, I think the equivalent in the US is a medical assistant. So a healthcare assistant in the UK, in the NHS, and medical assistant in the USA.
So that job in and of itself means it's open to anybody, both in the US and the UK. So there are no hurdles which you need to cross in order to get that job, which means if there is a real drive for medical assistants here, they're going to look internally. And we can link this kind of to a firefighter. Let's say a new, like our area, somebody relatively new, a new area pops up, and they don't have enough of those. Well, they can create programs and incentives for people from other states. Similar to what the UK does, or at least it used to do with Europe, it can look outside. Apart from the US doesn't necessarily need to look outside that far. It can say, right, There's many people in California, we can create incentives, and I've seen people being offered free education. Take this job and you'll get a year or 2 years or 3 years equivalent of a HND and a HNC in the UK, free education
with bonuses.
With bonuses, sign-on bonuses, so you're massively incentivizing. Now, that might cost the fire brigade or the medical department $10,000, but it's not costing them $50,000 for each person. Think about the process an employer or a country has to go through in order to want to employ somebody from outside of its own country.
That doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions to that, and there aren't times where they could be truly struggling, where they've exhausted the options locally, also had programs to get people across from other states, and that hasn't worked. And that's when there could be a genuine staffing shortage, and typically then that would be advertised on the immigration websites.
If you go online at the moment onto LinkedIn, there's actually job adverts from Australia, because Australia has a tiny population but such a demand for technology and engineering. They'll tell you there are immigration opportunity, and that's the first part of the job. So they are sponsoring you, they're actively looking because they don't have the people to fulfill that.
Typically, if you take one of those avenues, there's dedicated visas that are usually fast-tracked in order to get you across. So it is always worth checking for those gaps. But that leads to the next bit of what would we advise to you in your position and you really want to move to the USA. Let's just assume for now that there isn't a shortage of firemen or healthcare assistants, and there is no schemes for that to get across to the USA. We would say, and I think you've said this in another video, go and have a look on the website for where there's demand for certain skills ultimately, and see if that's an opportunity for you whilst you're in the UK to upskill yourself in those areas and put yourself on the right path. And it really depends on kind of your motivation and how much you want to do it. But I know people that have definitely changed career courses and very happy that they've done and made that decision. It's not something they've regretted.
Yeah, definitely not. I think, and I don't know this story that clearly, but my dad had family or has family in Florida, and they moved, has to be 30 years ago now. And they came out for nursing, and one of them was a truck or some sort of driver, but at that time that's what they needed. And you can kind of tell because salaries are really high, and the reason salaries are generally high is a combination of skill and demand. And demand is only because there isn't enough, because if a market's saturated, you can offer much lower salaries. So consider as well, when you look at lower salary jobs in the UK, there's a reason for that. They're not just low salary because they decided, it's because you can generally fill them relatively quickly, and there's a lot of people that are there to backfill those roles, no matter how much in demand they are or appreciate those jobs are. That is the cold hard truth of it. There's a lot of people that can fill those roles, and the higher paid ones, generally it requires a lot more skill, usually a lot more education as well, except for the examples that you gave where there just might be a shortage of something.
The other thing I would look into, and this is something we've said across the other videos, consider, is there a business that you could start? Is there a business opportunity that you could bring over to the USA? Is it possible that one of you could get a student visa to come over here? There are ways of doing it. I did joke with that, maybe you can divorce and marry an American.
Yeah.
No, we don't advise that one. There are ways of doing it. What you have to ground yourself in is the objectiveness of it. So if you know it's an employment-based visa that you're going for, it's what job is going to get an employer to sponsor me? And if I am not in one of those types of roles or professions today, what changes can I make whilst I'm in the UK to upskill myself and get into one of those positions? If that's not a possibility, what can I study? And then if that's not a possibility, maybe think about a business idea.
My last piece of advice is ask yourself, how scared of spiders, snakes and kangaroos are you really? Because if it's just the sun and better salaries, go to Oz. It's so easy for UK people to get in. And they really value things, or at least the last time I looked, which was 6-7 years ago, trades. So you can still get in being a plumber, an electrician. I'm not sure about firefighters, probably though, but it's definitely worth a look because Australia's a little bit closer to the UK in terms of culture, but you still get the sun and they have great salaries. They're a good 40-50% as a minimum more job for job when I've been looking.
It's a really good point. I personally know more British people that have been successful in moving to Australia than I have known for the USA. We did consider it. We're terrified of spiders. It would never work for us.
I wouldn't say never now. Now I've lived in a foreign country, I think I'd give it a go.
I don't know, I couldn't deal with their spiders.
So hopefully we've given you some understanding and partially answered your question, or at least put you on track to
Think
the
of a
next
way.
step.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for watching.